We're now going to complete the employment/military service histories on our applicant. And what we want to make sure is we cover employment going back 10 years. And what we're talking about right now is adding civilian employment. Now, this would be a new employer that we're getting ready to add. Now, the employment activity is what kind of category of employer are we talking about? And we are dealing with non-government employment. Now, this excludes self-employment, which is a different category. We're going to include the date range. And what we have here is a job that Ronald Dobson has held since April of 2015 to the present, and it is estimated that that's when he started. Now, the employer has verifier address and phone number. Some things to consider is we are talking about the physical location where this individual works. For example, Walmart, in this case, is a large employer. We're not talking about the corporate headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas. We are talking about where this individual worked, what store they work at. And telephone number for that store. Now, employment history data can sometimes be as difficult to retrieve from the applicant as residence history. But in some cases, you have some resources here available. They can pull old pay stubs. They can pull employee handbooks. They can pull lots of resources that they might not otherwise have for residences. So this one can be a little easier to tackle. List the most recent position title that they're holding. It's a full-time job, the hours worked, 40 hours a week, and a brief description of job responsibilities. Shelf filler in this case. The upper shelves, he is tall. All right. Now, the employer verifier address, the country code, the cell phone, the applicant's work address, and phone. Now, did he work at a different location than the employer's address? Supervisor verifier information. Everybody's got a boss. Now, in situations where you have, for example, this comes up not just here, but it comes up with references, it comes up with residence references. If you do not know your supervisor's middle name and are unable to obtain it, but it is a required field, then the best you may be able to put in that field is unknown. It won't like a blank field. It won't accept a blank field. Now, the supervisor works at a different address or not, yes or no? Have you worked for this employer before this period? And of course, have you been reprimanded, or is there any other indication of misconduct? Were you a bad employee, yes or no? Mark it as complete. It accepts it as complete. And there is, of course, another job. Job held before this one. Now, bear in mind, as you are listing periods of employment, you may find periods of unemployment where they did not have a job. In situations like that, you treat that period of unemployment the same way you would treat a job. You list it, the date from and to, the date they started being unemployed and the date they stopped being unemployed by getting a new job, but you include it the same way. Now, for verifiers and supervisors, you may have to list someone who is obviously not an employer, but a parent, a spouse, someone who can verify that that individual was unemployed. But you treat it the same way you would treat an employment entry. So the second job was at Taco Bell, 30 hours a week as a part-time job. It is also non-government employment. And again, as you're inputting periods of employment or unemployment, make sure that the dates do not overlap. You cannot be both employed and unemployed at the same time. Now, your instructors will carry you through some particulars about how to deal with multiple jobs at the same time, 2 part-time jobs, or perhaps a job and a reserve component military service. But for our purposes, simply bear in mind that you don't want date overlaps. In this particular case, because we're dealing with a previous job, they want the reason for leaving. This can be a concise statement up to 250 characters. It does not need to be a story, it just needs to be a brief explanation. The employer and verifier's address and phone number for this second job. And again, another possible resource, individuals of a certain age, beyond a certain age, typically have resumes. You can pull previous job information from resumes, cover letters, things of that nature. These are not considered necessarily source documents because they're not required to be included with the packet when you submit it for enlistment or processing for enlistment. But obviously, the information you derive from these documents needs to be true as well. And again, was the applicant's work address different than the company address? In this case, no. So you copy and paste the same address, or not copy and paste, but click the radio button to fill in the same address. The name of the supervisor. Position and title of supervisor. And again, this is typically just what the applicant tells you they were called. Were they called the shift supervisor, the manager, the crew boss, whatever? There's not a list of specific acceptable titles. And we are copying and pasting that address once again because it is the same. And again, the same questions. Did you work for this employer in some previous time period? Were you a bad employee? And were you fired, quit after being told you were being fired, left by mutual agreement following charges or allegations? This is a question that wants to know the nature of why you no longer work for them. Mark it as complete. And that completes the employment history. There are no additional employment activities to enter, but some general questions. Were you fired? Did you quit after you were being told you were being fired? The same questions they ask of every job you leave. Save the employment answers. And in this case, we do not have any military periods of service history to add. This is a pure non-prior service applicant. So we go down to employment screening. There is one page of questions to be answered, and it is one question. Do you have any former federal civilian employment? And the answer is no, and save. And that marks as complete. So we mark the entire field as complete. A date break has occurred. All right, let's see. We are dealing with 1st of April to the 31st. There is a date blank between the 31st, or between the 1st and the 4th. So basically a date of the 1st of April to the 3rd of April should be accounted for. We either have to close that gap or we have to include a very brief period of unemployment. In this case, we will correct the typographical error. And mark as complete again. And it is closed out and marked as complete.